Welcome to Movies and Milk, a new short form review series where I talk about a movie that's just come out in about as much time as it takes to drink a glass of milk. And of course, since we're talking about Elvis, we're drinking full fat milk because if you know anything about Elvis, well, you could probably finish that joke yourself. Priscilla is the new film by Sofia Coppola about Priscilla Presley. This is basically about their contentious and controversial relationship based on Priscilla Presley's own memoir. Now, I can be a bit up and down on Coppola's work, but I do think this is her most accomplished film to date, and I definitely think she was the right choice for this story. The film manages to be both naturalistic and stripped down when it has to, but also being grandiose and otherworldly, and that really reflects the change in Priscilla's world, in those worlds she's kind of swept up in by this romance. So those expecting a hit piece on Elvis will probably be disappointed. It doesn't outright call him a predator or her a victim. Instead, it just shows the kind of insensitive and callous nature that Elvis could have. And certainly through modern eyes, regardless, it seems like this was kind of a case of grooming. But it asks the audience to reflect on it themselves and come to their own conclusions. The film really manages to reflect how Priscilla feels trapped by the end. Graceland and the bedroom start to feel very claustrophobic, and it seems like we see less and less sets, and instead are kind of forced to imagine what Elvis is doing, which really does a great job in making us relate to Priscilla, but also manages to do a good job of keeping the focus on her story, which is what this film should be. Performance-wise, we have Jacob Elordi as Elvis, who we recently saw in Saltburn, and he is really good as Elvis. It's a performance where he's kind of a bit charismatic, but at times haunted. It feels like a more portrayal of the man as opposed to the icon, and that's what really works. But he feels like a presence throughout the film, even when he's not on screen, and that's how Priscilla would no doubt have felt. But of course, as Priscilla, we have Kaylee Spenny, who steals the show. She has a timidness and a tenderness to her, and really feels very passive in her own film at times, and it really gets the audience behind her as she starts to grow a bit more independence and sort of looks for a life of her own as she throws off the idea of this teenage fantasy. Elvis's music is not in the film, but it actually strangely works. It keeps the focus away from the man and the performer and instead on Priscilla, which is what's needed. In that regard, this kind of feels like the sobering complement to the boozy spectacle that was Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. My biggest criticism for the film would probably be its pacing. It feels like it starts with a lot of fun energy and then just kind of limps to a finish. And while this might sound like a contradiction, it also feels kind of rushed towards the end, like they're kind of cramming a lot of story. Priscilla has got milk. That sounds weird when it's a person's name. It's a good movie, go see it. Welcome to Movies and Milk, and today in honour of the boy and the Heron, we're drinking Japanese milk. Now if you're looking at that and saying, that doesn't look very different, Tom. All milk looks alike to you? Racist! This is the latest Studio Ghibli film, and more newsworthy was the fact that it was expected to be Hayao Miyazaki's swan song. And yes, very appropriate because there's birds all over this film. But I also wonder if perhaps the critical reaction to this is a little bit more generous because people thought this was the end of the road for him. Now, I'm not going to get into the story of the film, mainly because I would not know where to begin, but also it's because the story is very meandering. There's also a lot of biographical elements from Miyazaki's own life, and it certainly deals with themes of legacy and death, which is appropriate if this was going to be his final film. But my problem is that there's so many themes in the film, and none of them are really engaged with significantly. There's a lot of brushing over of themes, and because of that, you can kind of latch onto whatever theme you want and take away whatever message because of how vague it all is. I thought the film had a real meditative, melancholy vibe at the start of the film that I really enjoyed, but by the time we got to the second half and got into the fantastical side of things, it lost a lot of its narrative focus, and because of that, the emotional heart of the film felt a bit compromised. It was a lot of going through the numbers of character X must go to Y and repeat. And because of that, it felt like a lot of the payoff of the plot either felt rushed or actually came out of nowhere. The animation in the film, on the other hand, is absolutely stunning. We just don't get films that look this good anymore, from the intricate and elegant character movements to the beautiful jaw-dropping backgrounds. And then we, of course, have the signature Ghibli character designs where we might have something that's really cute and cuddly that you'd want a plushie of, or something that is disturbingly detailed when you see like an old woman's face. It made me feel sick, but this is a gorgeous looking film. Equally lovely was the score of the film, which I thought was majestic and moving, even at times where I felt like the film was lacking. And on that note of sound, I saw the dubbed version, and as you would expect with a lot of Studio Ghibli films, they're absolutely flawless. Robert Pattinson is chief among them. He's going to really shock people in this. The film has a darkness and edge that might surprise people who have forgotten what Studio Ghibli is capable of, but yeah, it's got blood, guts and more beside. And of course, Studio Ghibli style, there's really cute creatures that'll kill you, and then there's the cutest, cuddliest creatures that you fully attach to, and then they get decimated and you just have to go about your day and deal with that, and that's tough, man. I'm not going to say I'm the most well-versed in Ghibli films, but I will say that for me this felt like one of the weaker entries. It's a bit disjointed and muddled, but on the other hand, I will say there's enough beauty and food for thought, especially in the first half, that it is worth seeing. The Boy and the Heron has got milk. Sorry, that's like our rating system. Did I explain? It's like thumbs up, thumbs down. Got milk, hasn't got milk. It doesn't matter. Welcome to Movies and Milk, where today we're swapping out our milk for evil pool water, because today we're talking about Night Swim. Night Swim is a movie about an evil swimming pool that kills or tries to possess people. I have no idea how a movie with that plot managed to get some actually decent actors like Wyatt Russell and Kerry Condon. Kerry Condon, by the way, following up her Oscar nomination for Banshees with this movie. And honestly, she deserves another Oscar nomination for delivering some of this dialogue with a straight face. There's something wrong with that pool. Although congratulations to Wyatt Russell for not dying of embarrassment when delivering this line. That pool is the best thing that ever happened to me! The rest of it tries to be sincere and have no sense of humour or self-awareness. They think they're being scary, and I have no idea how, considering they show an evil spirit in the film, and it looks like Danny DeVito in Batman Returns. The only other source of enjoyment was how much they had to awkwardly weave the pool into the story. For a film that wants to play it straight, the dramatic and emotional moments also totally fell flat. This movie absolutely has no milk. It is terrible. Honestly, it's a bit early to pick my worst film of the year, but if it gets much worse than this film this year, I'm diving headfirst into the shallow end. Welcome to Movies and Milk, where today, in honour of the Beekeeper, we're indulging ourselves with some milk and honey. The Beekeeper follows a former operative of a secret organisation known as the Beekeepers as he goes on a quest for vengeance. This comes from writer-director David Ayer, who gave us Fury, The Bad Suicide Squad, and wrote Training Day. So he's a director with a bit of an inconsistent track record, but this, I like this quite a bit. Now, it's far from art. It's a silly, over-the-top action shoot-'em-up, but in the endless parade of John Wick clones, this is somehow the most self-serious and one of the most ludicrous. Jason Statham is just clearly invincible that it's kind of funny. Like, there's scenes where he goes up to people, tells them what he's going to do to them, and they're just powerless to stop him.
Alright, here's what's gonna happen, SEAL Team 6. You're gonna tell me what I want to know. I'm gonna kick your ass to see if I can final.
I was joking around and then I remembered there's actually a scene like that in the movie where there's a SWAT team stationed on a building looking for him, and he just walks into the middle of them, tells them exactly what he's going to do and how he's going to go into the building, and they just try to stop him and he beats the piss out of them.
Cinema.
This to me just felt like an 80s Arnold movie. Today. Does that make sense? Josh Hutcherson is our bad guy. He's this douchey trust fund kid deliberately manufactured for you to hate him. He plays it perfectly, and when you see his connections and how high this conspiracy theory goes, there is nothing you could do but laugh and enjoy it. And by the way, it doesn't make it any harder for Jason Statham when you see those connections. He has no problem killing his way up the food chain. Then we have Jeremy Irons, who's also there just to give a bit of a stiff upper lip. And yeah, he does that well too. The movie, of course, belongs to Jason Statham, though he is the Beekeeper. And yeah, it basically is every Jason Statham performance. So it's awesome. And yeah, he's totally unkillable, his kills are creative, and he delivers all his lines with a raspy Cockney accent and a demeanour that makes it look like him smiling would actually cause him physical pain. And yeah, it's kind of weird that the character is obsessed with bees, because that doesn't seem to be a prerequisite for the Beekeeper organisation. In fact, we see another Beekeeper, and she looks like a Fortnite character, minigun included. I also really loved our top FBI agent saying, "I detect a hint of British Isles in your accent." Really? Did you?
No Sherlock.
This is nobody's idea of high art, but it is plenty of people's ideas, including mine, of a good time, because this movie clearly knows what got you in the circus tent, which is Statham kicking ass, taking names, and carrying the most silly and simplistic of stories to a solidly entertaining and guilty pleasure time at the movies. What else can I say except the Beekeeper has got milk. Get in, losers, we're reviewing Mean Girls, and since it's a review day, we drink pink, and that means we're strawberry milking it. Mean Girls 2024 is an adaptation of the Broadway musical version of the 2004 film, itself adapted from a book, but who's keeping count? And if you weren't aware this is a musical, I don't blame you, because the marketing has really hidden that fact away, which is odd because otherwise this is just a glossy but inferior version of the original film. That is not to say the song saved the film though. I have not seen the stage version of this, but overall there was 2 songs I liked. One song got stuck in my head, and aside from that, I can't really remember any of them. My name is Regina George. That is a real song. The cast in this was really good, and that's tough because the OG cast is like iconic and untouchable at this point. But yeah, they did a great job with this cast as well. Angourie Rice is Katie Heron, and Angourie has been good in everything I've seen her in. And she does a good job as well of nailing the change in Katie over the course of the film. Possibly does a better job than Lohan in that regard. Renee Rapp as Regina George is just an absolute star. She's going to be a big one, I feel, for a lot of people. And yeah, she relishes playing a villain. She really seems to be digging her teeth into this role. It's fantastic. Oli E. Carvalho as Janice. Loved her as well as the kind of BFF. And yeah, that's a character I've loved anyway, and I think she did a great job with that role. The rest of the cast is also really good. There's no one here who's a weak link by any means, but I also want to point out one scene stealer, and that is Avantika as Karen. Just absolutely hilarious. Even in scenes where she's not doing anything, your eyes are just drawn to her, and she's just really, really funny. I thought she was fantastic in the film. One of my bigger problems with the film is that it does feel a little bit cheap. Like originally this was going to go to streaming, and I think it does kind of show. Even in its wildest musical fantasies, it still looks a little bit tame and bland, and especially when you're seeing the same sets over and over again, it feels like they haven't done enough to visually distinguish them or do something really interesting which you can do with the musical medium. And yeah, the choreography and cinematography are pretty unimpressive as well. A lot of it is just people going right in close to the camera and singing close up, and yeah, you can only take so much of that. And I think because of that, it's hard for it to kind of shake off the feeling that this is like a Disney Channel sequel to a much larger and better original film. Some of the highlights for me were actually things that were changes or additions from the original film. For example, we get an awesome scene between Regina and Katie late in the film that really just humanized both characters and also got a bit of genuine emotion out of me. I thought it was a great addition. Then we have Tina Fey and Tim Meadows reprising their roles, and it was nice to catch up with them and see what their characters have been up to since the original as well. And finally, we get a lot of extra background on the fallout between Janice and Regina, and I thought that was quite well done as well. It also feels weirdly like the movie has had some of its edge filed off, which, you know, I never really thought of Mean Girls as an edgy movie, but I guess humour and sensibilities have changed in the last 20 years, and that's fine. But if you are going to make changes, it feels like you should also maybe change what your movie is trying to say. Like, you're telling me you have nothing fresh to say about the high school experience 20 years later, and there is some inclusion of, you know, social media and smartphone culture, but it feels mostly perfunctory. Unfortunately, on the whole, Mean Girls isn't quite fetch. It's serviceable, the cast is good, and the music, if nothing else, does give it a small bit of new life, but overall it feels like it has nothing to say aside from, hey, remember Mean Girls? Yeah, now it's a musical, and because of that, I would say Mean Girls has a little milk, but probably less than you're hoping for, and it's certainly not the heartiest or freshest milk. That's the problem with a two-tier rating system. It's good, more than it's bad, I guess. Welcome to Movies and Milk, where today in honor of Immaculate, we're turning water into wine. Oh. It's milk. Of course it's milk. Why would it not be milk? Immaculate tells the tale of an American nun who ends up in a lovely convent in Italy, only to discover it might have some sinister and dark secrets. Dark secrets in the church? Nah. If there's a hot star in Hollywood at the moment, it has to be Sydney Sweeney. And I don't just mean hot because of our star status, I mean because, you know. Let's be honest though, there are segments of the population that are going to see this film for Sydney Sweeney dressed as a nun, which is a totally valid reason, and the movie certainly doesn't shy away from its sexuality. Now sisters, let's make sure that when we do have a wash, that we all wash together and wear our see-through white garments. Seriously? Yes, it does feel a little bit male-gazy at times, but those who go to the film outside of following their ding-dang-doodle will find a surprisingly decent horror film. The movie has a good central concept, which I'm not going to give away, but if you think about the title for more than 30 seconds, you'll probably get pretty close. But it is kind of twisted at its core. While the concept is good, the execution at times is lacking. It feels like the movie goes for less psychological terror and more for cheap jump scares. And at times it goes into extreme places, but is more jarring for it. I mean, it got me the wins twice, so I don't know. Mission accomplished? The film has a somewhat measured approach initially, but then just runs headfirst into schlock in the final act. It was really campy and I kind of enjoyed it, as odd as it was. But there's also a political message which is incredibly on the nose, like, hey, guess what it is? You're controlling what's in my womb for religious reasons. Yeah, it's about as subtle as a rock to the head, but it's an important message nonetheless. Sydney Sweeney is also pretty good in this. She's not afraid to get intense and gruesome, which is part of the fun. And yeah, she put in more of a shift than I expected. Her character is very passive in the film, and it works because she gets more active at the end and it feels like a triumphant moment, but it also can make her character quite frustrating in the initial acts. Overall, I enjoyed this film more than I expected to. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and there's a good concept, even though it feels like at times it's holding back a bit, which makes the extreme elements stand out all the worse. It's not a great film, but there's a good film in there somewhere. I would say it's not immaculate, but it's not inadequate either. It's got milk. That's not a boob joke. Welcome to Movies and Milk, where today we're facing our demons by watching Late Night with the Devil and drinking... Nope. Not doing that. Not drinking that. Nope. Late Night with the Devil is a found footage film about a late night TV show host who, in a desperate attempt to boost ratings, brings a possessed girl on a show. And it goes about as well as you expect. Considering it's presented as a lost episode of a 70s TV show, the movie has style, and they really managed to nail the look and feel of those old talk shows, and it was a joy to watch. There are times where it breaks from that style to show behind the scenes of the show, which is important for exposition, but also feels like it betrays the format you just set up. But I didn't find it to be too big of a distraction either. The performances across the board are amazing, but God, it's so damn nice for David Dastmalchian to have a lead role after being a scene-stealing character actor for most of his career, and he's really good in this role as Jack Delroy. He's got this sort of smarmy, sarcastic, unlikable charisma that kind of nails that 70s celebrity. The world they've created, though, is incredibly captivating, from the characters they've taken from often real-life inspirations to the dynamic between the host and his guest both on and off camera. It was incredibly engaging to watch, just wondering what was going to happen next and what was real and what was imagined. And that's exactly how you would feel if you watched this show in a real-world scenario. It keeps you interested as a result when the scenes are just often people talking, because let's be honest, it's a talk show. But there's also lots of interesting practical effects and scary and tense moments that make it feel like an actual horror film. But there's also bits of levity, so it feels like a breezy watch, and certainly the short runtime helps that out. The ending is where it breaks into total insanity and over-the-top craziness in stark contrast to the rest of the film, but it was just mad enough that I think it worked. But not everything worked for me. I think some of the visual effects looked a little bit iffy. I mean, it's a tough line to walk. Do you make it look like a 70s effect so it looks suited to the era? Or did you do something new that could possibly ruin your immersion? And for me, the effects just looked a little bit too clean in comparison to the rest of the movie. And that's without mentioning the use of AI in some of the intertitles of the film, which is a real shame because it's the only real black mark against the film and seems totally pointless that they use AI to begin with at all. I also think the framing device they set up at the start of the film is kind of totally forgotten about, and it just seems a little bit odd. Like, the movie starts with a narration of who the host is, what this episode is, and why they made this episode, and yet there's none of that later on in the film. And it just seems a little bit strange because there's definitely a case to be made for if it's going to connect to the real world, you kind of need a real world explanation for what happens next. But I didn't want that either because it would have ruined the mystique of the film. It just feels that they kind of wrote themselves into a corner. Regardless, Late Night with the Devil is worth staying up for. Sure, it's a little bit gimmicky at times and feels like it kind of breaks its own format and rules at other times, but it's still an excellent film with great performances across the board, and it will keep you fully engaged. It feels like a fun but horrific time capsule into the world of 70s late night talk shows. And an ending that turns it up to 11, even if that feels like it is a bit much. Late Night with the Devil has got milk. Yeah, I'm not drinking the blood. Today, in honour of the First Omen, we're drinking holy water. Ooh, forgot to bless it. There we go, that's more like it. Prequels are something I rarely ever get excited for. They rarely ever feel to me like they justify their existence. Doubly so with horror prequels, and certainly The Omen didn't need one. I mean, what were they going to do? Baby Damien? It just seemed really unnecessary. And yet, this is a nice little surprise. Firstly, it's quite odd this came out so close to Immaculate because they're really quite similar, and they both follow American women who go to Italian convents and uncover some sinister conspiracy theories to do with women's autonomy over their bodies. In that way, they really feel like sister films. I mean, they are sister films, cause nuns... I won't make a habit of that. Divine. So I don't need to say a lot about the plot of the film, but our film is led by Nell Tiger-Free, who I admit I wasn't massively aware of before seeing this, and I thought she did a really good job at giving a bit of an intense performance at times and incredibly emotive when the story demanded it. We also have small supporting roles with the likes of Bill Nye and Ralph Ineson, who does a good job as an expositional priest. I think the film looked pretty interesting. It had a sort of retro 70s vibe initially to suit the setting of the film, and also had a lot of genuinely strong cinematography choices, just some good framing in this. There isn't a lot of jump scares as well, to the film's credit, but there is some unsettling ideas and some real creepy visuals throughout the film, and I have to say, I was surprised how far into the body horror aspects it went. That really worked. I can't say I was overly scared by the film, but certainly it did create a nice horrific atmosphere, and the score really added to that atmosphere, as much as that score lay heavily on the work of Jerry Goldsmith, who gave us the original score. Oh, Jesus. 2 hours for a horror film can be a little bit much for me, but I'm happy to say this one didn't overstay its welcome. It was brisk and generally well paced. I would say as well there's a twist in the film, and while I wasn't maybe all the way there, I was certainly in the ballpark, and that kind of prevented it from being a home run altogether, but I do think that twist is still pretty effective overall. I would say you probably don't need to have seen the original to enjoy this film until you get to the case of prequel-itis, where they make connections to the original film and answer questions nobody asked, or questions we already knew the answers to in the case of this, which all come towards the end of the film. I would say most of the references to the original film feel like they're coming from the death scenes. There's a few that feel like callbacks, and there's one that feels like it's trying to deliberately one-up the original, in which case, you know, But aside from that, those awkward scenes where it's connecting to the original film just feel a little bit out of place, a little bit post-credit scene-y, and yeah, are totally unnecessary. You're never going to believe what they call this kid. Yes, despite some minor misgivings, this is a major win. I enjoyed this way more than I expected to do. They managed to deliver something that was delightfully devilish, thanks to some interesting and at times extreme visuals, a strong lead performance, and a good-looking sound. And when you put all that together, it managed to escape the clutches of bad prequels. And with that in mind, The First Omen has got milk. Hail Satan. Welcome to Movies and Milk, where today in honour of If we're drinking imaginary milk. Oh, God. So I gotta go get some more, I'm sorry. If tells the story of a young girl who can see everybody's imaginary friend as she seeks to match them with new children or reunite them with their old children who are now adults. This is the latest film from writer, director and star of the film John Krasinski, and is a radical departure from his previous work being the Quiet Place films, and that this one is for kids. I think. I say I think because while it certainly is suitable for children, I can't imagine them getting excited about anything in this movie. It's more a case of adults reconnecting with their former child self than children just playing with imaginary friends, which would be more enjoyable for them. That's not to say the kids won't enjoy the imaginary friends. They're creative and fun in their design, and the visual effects are genuinely pretty decent, even though at least half of the imaginary friends look like mascots designed to sell you fabric softener. The problem is that none of the ifs really feel developed. We spent most of our time with Steve Carell's Blue, and I found him annoying. I wanted to just strangle him like Larry David with Elmo. They try really hard to make him cutesy, and it doesn't work. It was just really grating. And it feels like that time would have been better served with the character of Blossom, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, because that's a character that seems actually interesting, and there is a personal connection there, but unfortunately, that character feels totally underutilised, and that means that when she's on screen it leaves very little impact. The other characters of course have a far more significant role to play in the film. Our lead character of Bee is played by Kaylee Fleming, who is this curious and charming girl. I thought she did an excellent job and really landed the emotional scenes, which this film so desperately needed to work. Those emotional scenes are shared with her father in the film, John Krasinski, who is, yeah, as affable as ever. He's playing Jim from The Office, okay, but you know, it totally works. One person playing a different role than usual is Ryan Reynolds. He's a lot more jaded and unlikable, I would say, at times in this. And yeah, that kind of works in the film's favour because we're seeing him get chipped away over the course of the film, and he has great chemistry as the co-lead with Kaylee Fleming. So yeah, these people really, really lend it to the film working in that sense. I found the story of the film a bit underwhelming. It felt like it could have been this whimsical story of imagination, and while there are glimpses of that, instead there's a lot of pedestrian scenes that are filled with exposition about how the world works, and it just felt unwarranted and made the film feel plodding. The twists, if you're paying any bit of attention, are incredibly obvious. You probably have a few guesses along the way, but generally speaking, they lack a lot of impact, and that means the story doesn't pack a punch either. Frustrating too is that there is an interesting movie kind of bubbling under the surface here about why a kid conjures up an imaginary friend and why the imaginary friend manifests itself the way it does to that child. But I guess that's too heavy for a film like this, but for what it's worth, the film does have some weight. At the screening I was at, there were a few people that were left teary-eyed seemingly, and while I will say I didn't get to that level myself, I do think the emotional scenes and the moving moments are definitely why this film doesn't feel entirely disposable. All that said, it's hard not to at least like this film. It's got its heart in the right place, and while I didn't find it funny and thought it was a bit underwhelming, there were things I liked about it. The performances are good, the effects are decent, and there's some emotional moments that actually will work with adults. Now as for kids, they'll enjoy the fuzzy if creatures. After that, it's kind of hard to say, depends on your child I suppose. But you know, they could do a lot worse. It's certainly suitable for all ages, and I would say based on that, while your mileage may vary, it's a journey worth taking, and on those merits alone I would say If has got milk. Oh, there's no milk in here. We have fun around here. Look, there's no milk. I don't even like milk.